Hey, my name is Nathan Branson, and I teach English here at Carteret Community College. And I want to talk today a little bit about the claim. The title of my talk is The Advantages or the Power of the Claim over the Image or the Slogan. And if you are in my English 112 class, which I assume you are, this is something that could really help you whenever you are doing your homework over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then also forming your essay topic over the next couple of weeks, over the whole semester. So first off, you might be writing a claim. You might be writing an essay about a claim that I've already given you. For many of you, I gave a big list of topics, possible topics, that you could write about. And in that situation, you don't have to really think much about creating your own claim. You've already got it. You just have to figure out how to take that and make an argument for or against that particular claim. So the cool thing about that is a lot of those are really worded well, and all you have to do is figure out how to find the reasons and the research to do that. Later in the semester, if you're doing the Toolman essay or the editorial, that means that you need to make up your own claim. And so that takes a little bit more time and thinking and considering how you want to say it. And I'll be talking about that later in the semester and a little bit in this video. But today I really want to talk about forming a claim, also about just thinking about the why, like that clearly worded sentence is going to be an advantage for you in getting your message across over maybe an image or a slogan. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about why I believe the sentence is more powerful than an image or a slogan. Of course, everybody has their own purpose whenever they're communicating with somebody, so it depends on your purpose. For this class, your purpose is going to be to argue and to communicate a clear message to your reader. And so in that sense, the sentence or the claim is going to be your best bet. So I'm going to talk briefly about a guy named Neil Postman, quote from his book Amusing Ourselves to Death, which he wrote in 83 or 84. And he compares culture in the 80s to culture in the 1850s, and the 1860s, and the 1870s, around the Civil War. And he says during that time, the 1850s was different in the way we receive information in contrast to today. And in that time period, he called it a typographic culture that existed, but it was dominated by words in print. They did have pictures back then, but it wasn't like today where everybody has their own personal camera. Very few people had their own camera back then, so the way they communicated was through words. And that's why you take a literature class, you're going to be reading some poetry and some novels and some essays about certain topics. And so they were really well read back then. We are well read today, but in many ways we're not interacting with words as much as they were back in the 1850s, 1860s, 19th century. So if you kind of open up a novel from that time and you're thinking about reading the first couple chapters or even pages of a novel, and you're like, wow, they describe everything in such detail. Well, they didn't have pictures as much back then. They didn't have as many pictures. So they had to describe things in detail. The same things with poetry. Poetry is not popular today, really. I mean, songs are popular, but people don't go out and buy collections of poetry. And part of that is people wrote poetry back in the day, back in those days, because pictures weren't as common. So that was their way of capturing experiences, was to write a poem about it, an emotion. So photographs, Postman argues, and I'll argue as well, is a little bit more emotional experience. So if you want more of an emotional reaction from a reader, you might put a photograph in it. So like for me, I have my phone here, and if I want to show you a picture of something I've experienced. I might show you a picture that from my trip to Scotland I took back in May 2019. And I've got a picture here, and here's my picture of Scotland. It's kind of changing around on me a little bit, but there's my picture so I can come back home and show it to my friends. And of course I'll describe it to my friends, but that's my purpose, is to connect with my friends and say, hey, look at this amazing cliff that I stood on and looked out over this sea. And so that was my purpose, to sort of entertain my friends and share my experience of being in Scotland, in Isle of Skye, which is a really beautiful place, and I hope that you go there one day. So in terms of photographs, they are awesome for sharing experiences. And again, that's why if you're reading a novel, that's why there's description in there, because for a long time in human history, we didn't have photographs that we could share as easily as we can today. So when we look at the 80s, when Postman wrote this book, television was the main way that people were receiving information. The internet had not been created yet. Every American didn't have a computer, but it's very similar to today in the sense that people were watching more and more television, so they're interacting with TV shows, movies, the news, and commercials. So he considers to be a more image-based culture. And in his book, he talks about how the presidential debates, how much different the presidential debates were on television in the 70s in comparison to the presidential debates whenever Abraham Lincoln was arguing with Stephen Douglas, who ran for president before the Civil War. And he says that, believe it or not, the Abraham Lincoln debates were way more intellectual, way longer, way deeper than the Nixon-Kennedy debates, I believe in the late 60s. So he compares those. So the problem, but for us in this class, we are writing sentences to make an argument. So if you have a message to give to your reader, photographs are not going to do the trick, as they can help evoke emotion, but we want to think about how we can have a sentence that clearly states what we want to say to our reader. So there's no confusion about what our intent or our motives are. And that's the great thing about writing. We can be clear about what we mean, what we don't mean. And so Postman says you can't disagree or agree with a photograph. He doesn't hate photographs. He's just saying there's a lot of advantages to the written word, you know. And this becomes a problem we have when we're talking about something serious. Okay, so if we have a photograph of Donald Trump's face, we can't agree or disagree with that. His face, right, or this photograph of his face. It's going to evoke a lot of emotion. But if you know, people who might want to defend Trump, will maybe those thoughts come to head. People who want to criticize Trump, maybe some of those things will come into their minds. But if you're just looking at the photograph itself, it's just a person's face, you know, his face. But if we really want to debate about the President of the United States, we want to put a sentence and say something about policy that he has, or something about something he said. Do you agree with President Trump about this thing that he said? Then, if you have people who want to defend Trump and people who want to criticize, then it's a lot more clear about what we're agreeing or disagreeing about. And it becomes a little bit more logical and definitely more clear about what we're trying to accomplish. If it's just a photograph, there's not any logic behind it, really. There's not anything to argue. So Postman is like I said, he's critical of the image culture. He says Americans no longer talk to each other; they entertain each other. They do not exchange ideas; they exchange images. They do not argue propositions; they argue with good looks, celebrities, and commercials. Okay, he said that the year I was born. Okay. So things have not really changed in this area very much. Now, are we going to say social media is better than the culture of the 80s? Maybe, maybe not. I don't really know. I'm not really going to argue that for or against that, but we definitely have it. We definitely are still a culture of images, since I can send all my friend images of my trip to Scotland or whatever. So all that to say, we live in a culture of images still. But in our class, we're trying to think about how we can use words to be clear about what we're arguing about. An argument can be a really amazing thing if we do it right, and that's what I'm trying to encourage in our class. Okay? So, Postman says this about the sentence. To engage the written word means to follow a line of thought, which requires considerable powers of classifying, inference making, and reasoning. It means to uncover lies, confusions, and overgeneralizations, to detect abuses of logic and common sense. It also means to weigh ideas, to compare and contrast assertions, to connect one generalization to another. So he's talking about sort of getting past the generalization, if we're talking about politics, and talking about if we're contradicting ourselves, things like that. We want to be clear about what we mean if we're going to have a maybe political debate, right? So the power of words can help us to clearly put something we believe deeply into words, so we can share it with other people. And that's so. I want to talk a little bit about that. So when we think about claims, let's think about how we can make a claim about something. And the first thing, whenever you either you have your claim that you're going to argue, you've got to find some reasons, or if you want to make your own claim, you have to come up with something that's clear that your reader can agree or disagree with. So I personally keep a journal, and whenever I write out my thoughts about something I maybe want to write on my blog, it really can help me get out what I want to say. So it might be kind of a mess for like a page, but then I come up with this one sentence, and I'm like, that's what I'm trying to say, that right there. And then I can maybe choose that as my claim. So some people, when they're trying to figure out what they want to say and have that claim as their central point, and that's what I'm talking about when I say claim. I'm asking you to find your central point that you want to make in your for your essay. And for me, a lot of times I just have to write on a piece of paper, and then after I write on a piece of paper, I'm like, that's the thing I'm trying to say. If it's in my head, it's kind of a little bit all over the place. Sometimes I will use my phone and I'll record myself talking if I'm like driving or something, and then when I get home, I write it out what I said on my phone. That's another way for me to brainstorm. So those are some ways you can find your own claim to make your statement, right? Because I'm wanting to encourage you to find what you believe or some topic that you want to write about and to argue for it. Okay. So sometimes, if I've got my journal. Let me get my journal real quick. I have it right here. Here's my journal. Keep it with me at all times, and got all kinds of goals and things. So I write in it on a regular basis. I encourage you to do that if you enjoy doing that, writing. So if I wrote something in my journal, and I said, I'm tired of all these stereotypes about young people being lazy. I hate people who say that millennials won't go get a job. I hate old people who are cynical about young people. Okay, so if I've said that in my journal because I'm frustrated about something. So this is not really something you can argue for or against, because in some ways this is a good start, but it's not like, it doesn't have that central statement that you would ask people to say, are you for or against this? So if we're going to talk about creating a claim, this isn't going to work right now, okay? So if I said I'm tired of all these stereotypes about young people being lazy, I hate people who say millennials won't go get a job, I hate old people who are cynical about young people. And so I'm an older millennial. So first of all, we want it to be in third person, okay? First person is great. If I'm writing a memoir about this topic, that's fine. If I'm writing on a blog, but for our class, other than the editorial, you want to try to, in general, you want your claim to be not I like, I don't like, I love, I hate. You don't want it to be like that. You can say something like that maybe later in your editorial if you're writing your editorial, but generally you want to make it in third person as a claim to get yourself out of the way. So put it in third person. Second, we want one claim to focus on. So do you want to write about young people being lazy, maybe stereotypes about that? Do you want to write about millennials not being underemployed, something like that? Do you want to talk about old people who are cynical? Why are they cynical about young people sometimes? Some older people can be cynical. So these are kind of three different topics, and maybe you could find a topic that encompasses all of them. And we also want to maybe not try to write about all those in the same paper. Sometimes we can find a way to incorporate those three topics all into one paper. So we want to make it clear, and we want to kind of commit to one claim so that our audience doesn't think we're going to take them on a rabbit trail. People don't want to be taken on your ramble or your rant, okay? So because of that, you want to try to commit to one focus. And if you can get to tell your reader, this is what I want to focus on from the beginning, then they're going to be more maybe attracted to what you have to say, because that means they know you're not going to waste their time, okay? So here's a claim that I wrote out, and some of you guys might recognize this because we talked about this in our online forum. All teenagers should have a part-time job before they turn 18 years old. Okay, so that is, teenagers should have a part-time job before they turn 18. So that is related to the topic I'm talking about. And if I'm arguing for that, I'm trying to persuade my audience that this is a good idea for high school students to have a job before they turn 18. And so that could be something you could build your argument around. Like I said, some of you guys have probably seen this in my forum that I posted on Moodle. So that's a good example of a claim. So people can say, no, they can disagree with that too. They can say, no, I don't think that. If you're saying all teenagers should do that, that doesn't. Some teenagers need to focus on their school. Some teenagers do other extracurricular activities that are really important to them. And so, but if I'm speaking like out of something I read from my journal, I'm trying to debunk this myth that young people are really hardworking and they have a lot of potential, then this could be something that could kind of address that as a solution in many ways. So this actually doesn't have any of the words that I used in my journal entry that I wrote, but it's on topic, okay? So another way to phrase that, and this is what we do when we have our claim, we phrase it in many different ways to see what works best. I might take out the word all, and I'll just say teenagers should have a part-time job before they turn 18. And this sounds a little bit less mandatory for all teenagers, and it makes a little bit more of an option, so you're just saying this is the best option for teenagers. And then, you know, if as a millennial, if I'm arguing for that, I could talk about how that helps teenagers become more mature, something like that. Another way you could phrase this is, it is beneficial for a teenager to have a part-time before they turn 18. So that's just saying it's a good thing. You're not saying all teenagers should do this, and it's just saying it's helpful. Okay, so that's a little bit less of a hard stance. Okay, and sometimes that's good. Sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes whenever you are arguing, you don't want to take such a strong stance. you might take a little bit of you're taking a stance, but it's not as all-encompassing, okay? So it depends on who you're talking to, okay? Let's say you would say it the opposite way. It is more harmful than helpful for a teenager to have a job before they turn 18. This is saying this, it's going to do more stress, put more stress on the kid, the teenager, than help them mature. And if you were going to take the opposite stance, you might say that. And you're saying, yeah, there's too much stress on teenagers today. They need to focus on school rather than seek out employment after school. Okay, so those are just examples of how you form your claim. Okay, so that was kind of my process. Like I said, I got my journal, think about it, I kind of do a word vomit on a piece of paper. I figure out what part that I like, and then I sort of play around with the words. And so for you, you are able to do that in my class to choose a claim. And for you, you want to find something you're passionate about, and you want it to be specific. The more broad it is, the more we're a little bit like, oh boy, I don't want to go on a rabbit trail with this person with their thoughts. Rather, you want to say, this is what I'm talking about. That thesis statement in some ways is almost like a promise that this is what I'm talking about for the whole paper. Do you want to hear what I have to say about it? You're building that trust. And then another thing, part of the homework that we have, if we look at slogans, this is a slogan or this is a bumper sticker I saw. It's question authority. Okay, so question authority. You'll see that on a bumper sticker, something like that. And slogans are not full sentences. Okay, so I'm not trying to be over the top about grammar about this, but they do evoke an emotion, but it's not always clear what authority are you talking about. You know, which authority should we question? All authority? Okay, that's okay. Maybe we could agree or disagree about that. Another one you might see is another one you might see is this one's been out for over 20 years. Coexist. Okay, but all of these letters would be different symbols that most of them are representing religions. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay. In some ways, it can be interpreted in many ways, and that's fine for a bumper sticker. That's kind of trying to create a conversation about maybe how religions interact with one another. Okay, so that might provoke a good conversation. However, for a debate, if you just said coexist, let's debate, agree or disagree, I can't really agree with a word in just a bunch of symbols. A sentence would be better. So what sentence could you come up with out of this right here? What is implied in this bumper sticker? If I was thinking about the question authority, you would think about those who have power over you may not know the best way to do things. So that's what maybe the person means. The people who are in authority over you, you should question them because maybe they're not the expert that they come off as, which I think is true. So that sentence there is more accurate. Some of this you guys understand. I'm just trying to focus on like sometimes just two words or one word with symbols is not as accurate as a full sentence. Okay? So another one would be keep those in authority accountable for their actions, or those in authority might become corrupt if they are never questioned, which I agree with totally. So a lot of times bumper stickers can provoke questions, but they're unclear about their exact meaning. And for us, if we're going to have a good discussion, we want to have good communication and not to become confusing to one another or even divisive. It's good to have clearly worded sentences as opposed to communicate in slogans. So, in closing, whether you're creating your own claim or you're arguing from a claim, remember the advantage you have in writing a clear sentence. And so for you, as you're writing your essays, think about your opportunity to share what you feel passionate about. Think about how you can create that claim, and so your audience can really understand your intent and your specific point of view. So that's up to you to create that for the later essays. So think about that and that advantage, and also don't forget that we do live in a very we're saturated in images, and sometimes by maybe typing out, like for me, I'm only on Facebook, and a lot of times if I have something I want to say, I'll type it out clearly in a paragraph on Facebook. That's not cool, but people are like, why don't you narrow it down? Well, I have a lot to say, and I want to type it out so everybody can read it. I'm not going to get as many likes for that, but at least people understand where I'm coming from, and I'm not trying to stir the pot or shock anybody. I'm just trying to say something, okay? So just do think about that as you live in our 21st century culture about sentences versus images or slogans, and which is the best one for you to use to get your message out, and that could vary depending on the situation. So please email me if you have any questions. Hope this has helped you understand claims. You guys have a good day.